So before we start, I do have a second channel. So if you are interested in more content that isn't related to anime and manga, consider going over there and subscribing. Also, if you end up enjoying this video, consider leaving a like. I'd greatly appreciate it. So I have something that is a rather interesting question, at least in my opinion. It is definitely silly. It's not something that genuinely has to be played upon or something that is a primary focus for Chainsaw Man Part 2, but it is something that I do randomly, continuously think about, and one that I would absolutely love some sort of explanation behind. Even if it has no warrant to propel the story further, at least just to understand a little bit more behind Fujimoto's creative process and his mind, really, how he kind of pieces this together and why he depicts things a certain way. This question will also lead to a lot of what I believe interesting interpretations from yourself. Very happy. So I am excited to see what a lot of you think and if you even thought about it to begin with, because it is something that genuinely slips your mind and never really props itself up any further. What is that very simplistic question, you may ask? Why is Pochita a dog? Alright, hear me out. I know the question could be something else entirely different that would have been 10 times more interesting, but this is something that has genuinely plagued my mind for like the past 3 months. And I could never really draw up a conclusive understanding on why Pochita specifically is portrayed as like this meaty little dog. I would say it closely resembles a dog, but obviously it doesn't really look anything like one other than just like the general vague figure of one. Thinking activated. Because of this train of thought, I've gone down a lot of different paths just to try and understand Pochita specifically a little bit more in terms of symbolism and maybe some of the creative outlets that Fujimoto himself mentally put himself in to conceptualize Pochita as a character, as a dog, as Chainsaw Devil, but also what Pochita represents in the grand scheme of the story in Chainsaw Man, because we see a lot of very interesting variations of Pochita, what they are capable of, what Pochita inhibits, the symbol that he represents within hell, and the power that he truly obtains, which is a power, mind you, that is beyond anything that we have realistically seen so far. So how does a small chainsaw devil that is depicted as a dog have this power that is so universal, that is so inherently scary or powerful that can be used in a multitude of different ways? Big brain neuron activating. Let's start off simple. What does Pochita mean? If you were to type it in, what is the meaning of Pochita, and try to find some sort of translation for it, the closest thing you get is a Spanish translation, and it means big eater or glutton, which at first doesn't really have much of an emphasis towards it. You don't really see any of that for Pochita at the beginning of the story, but when you start to see more of the origins of his abilities, what he's capable of in the later half of the story with this full Chainsaw Man armor form, it starts to make a lot of sense. The biggest damage, or the most damage I should say, that Pochita can do to an enemy or to an individual is quite literally devouring them by eating them. And because of this, if it is done correctly, this devil, thing, person, idea, concept even, can be erased from existence. Very powerful, very scary. Now this in itself is realistically only possible because a lot of the conceptual ideas like the concept of death or war or suffering or the fear of something are directly linked to the embodiment of that concept. So the devils. And because these devils exist in some sort of plane of existence, Pochita is also part of that realm. So if he eats a devil, long story short, that devil will no longer exist. Meaning the concept that that devil embodies disappears forever, which can equally be a very good thing, but also a very bad thing. Having balance within the world is key, and if you disrupt that balance, for example, wiping out the concept of death, you don't really know what side effects that would bring. Would you wipe out the human population because they have no fear of dying, and a lot more people put themselves in arguably very dangerous positions that have a consequence of death? But they do not understand it. They do not fear it. So they do not shy away from the actions that put them closer to it. This sounds completely irrelevant, but this is the power that Pochita upholds and works directly with his name. Big Eater, Glutton. So where do we take that step? Well, let's look at the dog symbolism. Dogs are pretty easy. They're a powerful symbol of unconditional love, loyalty, and protection. Now this sounds pretty accurate for the early story Pochita. The depictions that we've seen, the unconditional love, loyalty, and protection that he gave to Denji. I would like to believe that the way Pochita acts is the reflection of the dog symbolism. Nothing super overinflated or super crazy, but just a nice little on-the-nose reference to dogs in general and how loyal and loving and caring they can be. And you see this rather constantly throughout the story. It's not like a one-time thing for Pochita. He's very caring, he's very lovable, and he wants to see these new memories that Denji will create for himself. Pochita even goes to the point of merging with Denji, which brings up a whole different conversation about his devil form, which we'll get onto in a little bit, but he quite literally has this unfathomable, unwavering love and appreciation for Denji. And it works well for Denji as a character, obviously, because we're experiencing the story through him, the hardships, the ups and downs, and Pochita is a part of that as well. Especially within the early story, you see what they both go through, what they both experience, and how they both uplift one another. They are each other's brightest stars in this very dark time. Very cute. So that ticks off the dog symbolism, pretty easy. What about the chainsaw? For me, the chainsaw one is rather funny because I didn't really think there would be much general symbolism for chainsaws specifically. Obviously, there's an origin for like the original chainsaw and what its purpose was, which I believe was to help or aid with childbirth. It sounds very graphic when I put it like that. I believe it had something to do with the hips or the pelvis bone and generally having an easier access to give birth, so it wasn't as dangerous potentially, which sounds like a complete contradiction, but don't think of like a 2021 chainsaw back in whatever date the first chainsaw was ever created. This most likely was some hand pulley type thing, so it was probably rather controllable. Regardless, to dream of a chainsaw represents wanton, complete disregard for feelings, no remorse, or little concern for consequences. A chainsaw may also reflect total insensitivity to others' feelings, uncaring forcefulness. Now this sounds pretty standard, but if you take this one step further, you can actually apply it more so to Denji, because Denji, through his childhood, what he's been through, the trauma that he's experienced, quite literally all of these things spiral around his identity, and you can't necessarily blame him for it. Because of those hardships that he's faced, the learning process that he's gone through is severely stunted, mentally, emotionally, and sometimes even physically. So the wants that he has, the urges that he feels, and the way that he convinces himself, other people, and genuinely just the thought process that he goes through very much so pulls or centers around a lot of these things. It's not something that you genuinely have to kind of connect to the main character. It's not something that has to be played upon or explained. It's definitely that next step into overanalyzing certain things, which can be fun for a lot of people and can be rather annoying. But I find it interesting for something that I didn't think would have much symbolism, genuinely reflects Denji as a character, because all of these things is what he grows out of. He starts to learn, he starts to evolve, he starts to be in a better position, and he starts to feel certain things. He starts to care for other people. He starts to care about himself and shoot higher for the moon and for things that he thought he would never obtain prior. Very good evolution. So what does this have to do with the original question? Why is Pochita a dog? To be honest, the one thing that I continuously come back to is Fujimoto loves to write contradictions. Basically, every character within his story has some sort of contradictory nature behind them, whether it be the way they act, the way they feel, the character themselves, their identity, how they're depicted, even the art style surrounding them, their power maybe. Anything can be used. And because he does this so constantly, especially with the world of the story having very contradictory tones within it, it's a very interesting way to write a story where it's like this back and forth battle of trying to understand what Fujimoto actually means for his characters, and he puts them in very uncomfortable positions because that contradictory concept works extremely well. Pochita itself is kind of a prime example of it. Someone that is depicted as a dog, that is very loyal, that is very loving and caring, and you see this beautiful appreciation that Pochita has for Denji, but then the monstrosity of a being that Pochita can turn into. This hero of hell, what he originally is known as. Something that devils equally love and fear. It keeps a balance within the world. Now, there doesn't have to be an answer for why this is the case, why Pochita of all things, why the chainsaw devil per se, but I definitely wouldn't be surprised if Fujimoto took this idea further, showing us a completely different perspective of Pochita that we haven't seen. Maybe he chooses to be depicted as a dog, a kind, approachable creature, because the only way that he can potentially activate his ability is by taking a human form, which is 100% definitely more so headcanon, but definitely fits somewhat comfortably in the grand scheme of what devils actually look like. Usually what they turn into is a very altered or weird depiction of what they symbolize. Interesting. In Pochita's case, he does not do this. He doesn't turn into some giant dog, nor does he really turn into like a massive chainsaw. If anything, he still has a humanoid form, which Denji is kind of a part of. He's molded in it through and through. And I wonder if it is this way because of Denji specifically, because of a human body. And I wonder if it is because of the hybrid format. When you look at all the hybrids, they have more so a human evolution. So when it comes back to Pochita's origin, is he only capable of being the hero of hell? And this is kind of the big grand question. Is he only capable of being the hero of hell when he has some sort of human companion? And to ease himself into getting a human companion, he's depicted as a lovable, caring dog, which is genuine, which is appreciated, but more so designed so he can use people at his disposal. Because the devils are borderline immortal unless Pochita eats them. So when the human dies, if Denji dies specifically, I would assume Pochita would just be reborn back into hell and then have a chance to fight his way out, however that would work, into the normal world. Do you see how a lot of it is fueled by mystery and doesn't necessarily have to be explained? A lot of ideas. Very good. We know that to some degree Pochita has been fighting in hell, yet every depiction that we've seen of it, it's because he's merged obviously with Denji, but we know that he's fought the Four Horsemen before. Now, was this because he was merged with another human or another devil maybe? Or can he genuinely turn into the Chainsaw Man form himself? Or maybe another form that is away from the human body counterpart? I feel like I'm connecting the dots, but then equally spiraling out of control just with all the stuff I add. I apologize. Unfortunately, I cannot answer my own question, but I think it does make for a very interesting conversation. One that you can take in many different directions, and you don't even have to. It's definitely very overinflated and overthought about, but I would love for Fujimoto to explain his creative process, or at least give us more for Pochita within Chainsaw Man Part 2. Maybe a little bit more for his origin, maybe the semantics surrounding his abilities, or the ins and outs for it. And as we creep closer to Chainsaw Man Part 2 and the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse and Makima 2.0 with Naoyuta, there's a lot of interesting things that can be done. Do they have to be? Not necessarily. But I'm more than interested to see how Fujimoto continues to conceptualize his work further and to evolve it into something else entirely. End time. The real beauty of this video is honestly just you. I would love to hear your interpretation of Pochita because I'm super interested and I'm intrigued to hear what a lot of you may think. What are your own ideas for Pochita? Do you think there's a reason why he's a dog or like a little chainsaw and how it's crazy in comparison to the power that he actually has? Do you think it's just like that because it is like that? There's no other deeper explanation for it? Or do you have some massive, elaborate, big brain theory that no one else has ever heard of? Regardless of what you have, I would love to hear your thoughts. But I want to thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Leave a like and subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Drink plenty of water and I will see you within the next one. Goodbye.